Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. And this evening, we're going to talk with the very fabulous Mason West, who's a physical therapist in the Chicago area. And side note, he's also my nephew, so I'm a little biased, but I think he's doing some really incredible stuff, especially during this time, this pandemic time. And so I wanted to talk. Mason, he's passionate about concussions, and so I wanted to get on and talk a little bit more about strength and conditioning with him. So Mason, tell me a little bit about your background and your journey to becoming a physical therapist and where you're at today.
Yeah, so it really started, originally I was going to do orthopedic surgery, and then I got a chance to shadow for an entire semester with an orthopedic surgeon, lovely woman. I just found it wasn't for me because I found it to be a bit boring and not as, in depth with patient care as I wanted to. And then unfortunately my junior year, I tore my ACL playing lacrosse. And then that got to see the PT side of things, loved it. So that's what got me the passion for it. I went to University of St. Augustine to get my doctorate of physical therapy. A lot of emphasis on hands-on things like that. And then after that, looking back into my athletic career, I suffered at least 4, I think it was 5 concussions diagnosed officially. And who knows how many undiagnosed. Of course, treatment, everything today is so different than then. But that really, I thought back to then, like, okay, this is a very underserved population. It has so many ramifications long term. Let me get more detail on this. So I've taken a couple courses. Unfortunately, when it comes to concussions, right, there's not that gold standard, this is what you should do. So it's really about compiling information, comparing it to research. Does it make sense? And then, from there, putting together your own personal best practice and how you treat them.
That's very cool. I didn't realize you had that many concussions. That's incredible. And for you to be able to focus and get things to heal so that you got through, because I know also in between your undergrad and grad that you have another degree in there and that you were working and doing some research type stuff also, right? And so first of all, it's incredible. And to be able to put the pieces together, but then post concussion, I think that's even amazing. So what kind of things are you seeing about to treat concussions as far as in the PT clinic?
Yeah, so when someone first comes in, usually with a concussion, it's obviously they've been diagnosed at this point already, so I don't have to do too much in saying whether or not you have a concussion. It's more about putting them into certain categories. So are you cervical? Are you, is it vestibular, or is it potentially ocular? Usually it's a combination of all 3 of those. If not, 1 or 2 might override them. But then once you find that, you really start to get specific with it. So is it your the inner eye that's not working? Is it left ear versus right ear? And with that, you also have to clear the obvious stuff, DPT, things like that. And if you clear all those kinds of things, then you can really start to hone in on the specifics of the neck mobility, the neck strengthening, or combining that obviously now with some of the vestibular components or ocular components, challenge those to return them back to what they were supposed to be. And it doesn't matter if you were gardening and you tripped and hit your head that way, or if you were playing football. At the end of the day, you need to get them back ready to take on those kinds of things, because anything can happen at any point in time. It doesn't matter. I try to treat everyone like they're an athlete, because at the end of the day, I find that that's the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that like you said, gardening can be an athletic activity, and some people go hardcore and it's really intense. So I think that you're right, treating everybody like an athlete and putting the expectation on them to keep pushing ahead and getting better and challenging and getting them back to their baseline is key. So what would you recommend for someone to help prevent a concussion? Or, obviously traumatic, stuff happens and whatever, but beyond that, and doing the best you can to reduce the risk.
So when it comes to reducing that risk, it's really about knowing also for you individually what maybe some warning signs might be. So if you're already someone that has headaches, if you're already someone that has, needs to use glasses, if you're already someone that has neck pain, things like that, you're going to have to probably do a little more than maybe someone that doesn't have those kinds of things. And then when you look at it, in terms of that prevention, if you're going to do an activity that has that chance, again, we talked about gardening to snowboarding to playing football, you're going to have to then do some of the strengthening things that you would need to do, because inherently the way we live, posture forces us to not use the right muscles. And so everyone falls into that category. And then not just the pure strength component, but we're going to have to ultimately look at also that brain to muscle connection, right? Like, so do the right muscles turn on at the right time, so that over that period of time that you're not getting those, when you get a smack on the head, your body can absorb the force, distribute it properly, and move on. And then on top of that, it's not just limited to the neck, unfortunately. You obviously have to go up and down the body. There's a lot of really cool research out there that's showing things just as crazy as pelvic instability can increase chances of getting a concussion. So, all of those things are stuff we have to take into account when trying to prevent one.
That's definitely new info for me. And it fits right up my alley, because I think looking at whole body is important in everything that we do. And I like that there's research coming out to show that, because so often we get focused in PT on just treating the site of injury, and yet there's so much more that goes around than just that injury. Or preventing an injury, like getting stronger, doesn't just include neck exercises. It would include. So, are there any? Can you give some ideas of, without necessarily demonstrating, but just kind of talk through what different things might be that you would do?
So a lot of times, let's just say we're talking about purely cervical. If you're going to go look at the neck only, you're going usually right. We're going to overuse the upper trap. We're going to end up in that forward head posture here. So there's tightness in those suboccipital, those posterior suboccipitals, everything like that. So first off, we do need to just say, okay, get into that right posture, and not just shoving our chin back, because now we're extending into the upper back, but more vascular rotational, do that chin tuck, because we need to hit that longus coli, longus capitis. And inherently, when you strengthen the longus coli, longus capitis, they will also help those multifidi that in the neck, which increase force stability. So bare minimum, just doing the little chin tucks, probably not against gravity first, so laying down and doing those chin tucks. Then you can add resistance with the bands to be in a more upright position. And a lot of times that's where a lot of concussion stuff stops, because it's like, okay, great, now you're sitting and you can do all that stuff. But again, we're connecting it back to they're running again. You're changing your position, right? You're hip hinging, you're down on the ground. Your neck now needs to not just be stable here, but as you're now here and turning, because you got to look at your parrots that are over there, you need to challenge that person in those various positions, so that they're ready in those various positions.
Right. That's cool. That's I do a lot of postural education and more movement based, and trying to go from foot belly, but pelvis to head, and the chin tuck is a key thing. And some people will really either jam their head back or move forward, and so just remembering that it's those deep cervical muscles that are needing to, and they don't have to have a lot of power and strength behind them, but they need to have a lot of control, and it's kind of relatively small movements that help to get there in doing that.
Yeah.
I used to see people in the gym, they'd wrap a band around their head and do basically isometrics. I mean, I've seen some people long ago do active neck range of motion stuff, and I cringe, but I've played around a little bit with some bands, not recently, but for neck isometric stuff. Mm-hmm. It's hard, and you really don't need much resistance at all. But I like the stuff that you talked about a little bit better, and because I think it's a little bit more practical and functional, and
I'll certainly get into all those things, like you're saying, whether it's resistance or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you skip that neuromuscular activation of those, again, longus coli, longus capitis, those deep neck flexors, I don't care how hard you can pull your head this way to resist that force. If that should not be the first muscle that turns on, right? Those the major rotators, that should be secondary. First, it should be that those deep neck flexors and multifascial. Okay, hold on, there's something here. Okay, now let me try to resist it. So yeah, it's so all inclusive, and like you're saying, you have to look at the whole body, because even let's just say I'm sitting, if I train the neck to be perfectly set, but for some reason you're someone that likes to really extend in that rib cage, thoracic area, now if my neck's perfect here, it's like, oh great, I'm looking at the ceiling. That doesn't do anything for me unless I settle those ribs down and activate through the core and the pelvis.
Right. Very cool to integrate that all. Before we came on live, you were talking about the lower extremity. Mm-hmm. Is it more into lower extremity, that there's some research in the lower extremity as well as a pelvis, or?
Yeah, absolutely. So before I get into any lower extremity stuff, or even a lot of times the upper, I always make sure that I put people through the Buffalo concussion treadmill test. Um,
I don't know
and
that with that.
so that's one where really you can really do it as long as the symptoms will dictate it. The first couple days you don't do anything, but within the first week you really want to do it. You put someone on a treadmill, and you're monitoring their heart rate, their rate of perceived exertion. So usually I just show them a scale because that scale is ridiculous. If you just look at it, the research and the whole
Right.
Swedish boys were the ones that it was ridiculous anyway. And then a Likert scale, just kind of one of those happy face scales, and then monitor symptoms. So it's a set protocol where if you're over, I believe it's 5.5, you're at 3.6 miles per hour. Below, it's at a lower speed. And then what you're changing is actually the incline every minute. And you're monitoring all of those things and the heart rate and everything like that. So you're going to stop that test if the heart rate jumps too high. If they want to stop it, that's one of the biggest ones, of course. The symptoms by your standards are jump up substantially. And then the rate of perceived exertion, you never want to jump more than 1 to 2 numbers at a time. Then once you have that number, like their heart rate was, let's just say it was 135 when they started to get really bad symptoms, you have them work out at a maximum of 80% of that heart rate with time, a week or two, and then you retest them again. Because now, if you're going to get into especially resistance training, right, or if you want to put them to running, that heart rate is going to increase and decrease, and that's going to change the blood flow in the brain. And you don't want them to Valsalva and their blood pressure and heart rate shoot up, and while they're doing just let's say a T for scapular stability. So yeah, always doing the Buffalo concussion treadmill first and monitoring that throughout until I'm like, okay, you're cool. Now let's get into some of the lower body and upper body. In terms of that lower stuff, so there's a lot, like I said, there's a good amount of research out there now. One that I really thought was interesting is actually by Gilbert et al. Back in 2016, I believe. They took a bunch of Division I athletes, and they found that the concussion risk in the lower connect chain changed based off of if they had a concussion. So if they had a concussion, you were more likely to get a lower body injury, like an ACL or something like that, up to 2.9 times greater than if you hadn't had a concussion before. And that also correlates the other way too, where they have found that if you have poor dynamic stability in the pelvis, then this one actually is a different study by Johnson in 2019, that poor dynamic stability in the pelvis, they're at a 3 times greater risk of getting a concussion, just because, right, all of a sudden the pelvis drops and all your angles change, all this crazy stuff like that. And then I think one that I use a lot is where you look at actually how someone's going to land. So if you're going to, let's say, do a box jump or a depth squat off a box, let's say you're doing single leg, you land on that foot. Now all of a sudden they have to stabilize, let's take a couple hops. They found that there's also significant correlation with that. That if the more hops, the more you move that center of gravity from that base support you originally had. Now all of a sudden, same thing, your concussion risk goes up. I believe it's 2.6 for every inch that you have different.
It's a lot to look at.
Yeah, and of course, it's tough because, well, if let's just say working with an athlete, especially, you're trying to get them back as quick as possible. But first, you got to calm down the concussion symptoms. Then you got to put them, check out the cardiovascular aspect, and then once you get all that set and you get the next, not finally getting strong, the scapula gets strong. That might be 3, 4, 5 weeks. Now you're going to say, hey, okay, I'm not ready to go back yet because I haven't done the lower yet. And every time you land and you go into a genu valgus, you can just see the hip goes all crazy, and now it's a lot to try to monitor that mental aspect too. Obviously, with someone like that, that has to be back, and then of course you have to take into account even gender differences, unfortunately, because they found that females use more of a neuromuscular control, whereas males are strength. I mean, that kind of makes sense in terms of that. So, and while you're going to do both with both, if ultimately you're finding that brain to muscle connection, which to get any movement perfectly, it's, I believe, 100,000 times you have to do it before it integrates. That's a lot of reps that you're asking, in theory, this female athlete to do. And now she's just like, I want to get back because I'm disappointing my teammates and all this stuff, and you got to manage all that.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a huge psychological component that goes along with, it goes with any rehab process, but definitely with concussion, because I've seen kids that have more depression because of the concussion, and not necessarily because they're not doing something, but just because of the brain injury. So that aside, like, then you get into the rehab process and like, okay, I'm ready. I'm concussion, symptom free. Can't I just go play? And it's hard to get, especially youth players and youth, through high school. I think it's really hard to get them to understand, like, you need to slow down. You need to get yourself strong. And if you do this, you'll be better off and prevent an injury down the road. But if you don't do it, because everybody thinks they're infallible and can just get out and go do it,
One question I have pretty much all of my anyone do is the TSK-11, which is really just that fear avoidance questionnaire. Because a lot of times what the person says and what they truly believe are very different, right? Because they might be saying, I want to go back, but they found that if you get over a 19 on this questionnaire, that you're 13 times more likely to re-injure yourself, whether that be concussion or lower extremity. So, if they're telling me, oh, great, I'm ready to go there, and they do this, and it just, that doesn't match up. It's like, you're telling me this, but clearly you don't want to do this movement. You don't want to squat. You don't want to lunge. You don't want to do this. You don't want to do that. So how could I possibly send you back out there when you are telling me you can't go out there?
Right. That's a good piece to have I might need to get that from you again and find out what the name of that is to find that myself. I think that's a good tool to have. I have a couple questions here from John Driscoll, the athletic trainer at Algonquin that we talked with last week. And so he was wondering for you, how long did it take you to get back to normal after your concussions? And maybe after each concussion, did it take you a long time to recover?
So I would say it was more an exponential thing. After each concussion, it took me a little bit longer to get back. And then, of course, now you're talking about the difference between back I actually was playing and then back what I felt was normal. So my first concussion I remember was my freshman year, and then I would say that I wasn't, because this was my freshman year was back in 2005, I think, something like that. And so back then it was so different. It was, oh, you hit your head, go rest, don't do anything for 2 weeks, come or whatever it is, come back. Oh, your headache's gone, great, we'll send you back out there. So I would say that I never, from then into all the way till now, had ever properly had the right treatment for myself. So I would say that probably all the way up until then, my junior year of not even high school, but undergrad, I didn't feel back to normal. There were little things like a fogginess that was there. There were things, and I'm working on this. We'll get to probably some of that neck pain that causes a headache or vice versa. Yeah, I think I would, one of those things did a disservice. I would talk to a coach, athletic trainer, even like the training staff when I went to college, and be like, hey, like, I just don't feel right. And they're like, you know what, you're fine, get back out there. So, my story is probably a little different than what you would see today with that. But yeah, that's years. That's 7 years that I didn't feel back to normal.
Yeah. So, I think that's a key takeaway. Like, I think we all tend to shy away, like, oh, we're fine, and like, it's important to talk and it's important to figure it out. And it still takes a long time to get back into feeling normal, and don't give up the fight to get there too.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So now if we compare to the treated, the fastest one that I would say got back and hasn't had a at least reported concussion since, they got better in 3 weeks. It was nice. It was really quick. The longest one, they were having symptoms for a year and a half, and then a month and a half after seeing me, then they were able to get back to being normal. So, short and long.
Right. And as we talked about with John last week, that it's really important to let things kind of heal and so that because of the higher risk of the second one and of longer term lasting effects when you have repeated and you don't let things heal. He had one other question. The iron neck. He said the iron neck is a great device to strengthen the neck. Have you ever heard of it or used it? I haven't myself.
I have heard of it, especially in UFC martial arts circles. Again, I think it's great, especially if you are someone that's going to have that high velocity, high impact kind of sport like football, like lacrosse, MMA, and girls soccer. I think that's the second highest concussions actually in athletics is female soccer. Absolutely. However, if you haven't done all those pre-steps first, you're doing a disservice. And that's usually what people do to self-treat. Maybe a concussion or neck pain is like, oh, great, I just need to crank this out. You might get better in the short term, but in the long run, it's going to be much more difficult for you to keep those symptoms away.
Yeah. Anything else that we should know on or talk about on treatment of a concussion, or any other tidbits and such?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that, like with most things, of course, we're not all, we are snowflakes in that regard, where everyone's a little different with this. So each person's going to respond to stuff very, very differently. And the best you can do to really, it's more of an art than a science, unfortunately, because you need to challenge the person so you meet their symptoms. Like if someone all of a sudden starts to get eye pain, that's not all of a sudden, okay, let's shut everything down. Or someone gets head pain, let's shut everything down. It's like, okay, well, where are you within that? Because just like if you're going to do a squat, your legs are going to be sore while you're doing it if you're doing it right. So don't run from that, but at the same time, monitor it. Because if it's too big of a jump, that means you progress, give them a 5-10 minute break. I've had people where they've come in, we've done one exercise and we needed to take 10-15 minutes lights off just to relax before we will get back into it again. But that was very important. And they made those small gains where all of a sudden from 15 to 10 to 5 minute breaks that they needed. And when you're treating that person too, make it specific for them. If they have trouble walking and getting, down the grocery aisle, give them something to push. We'll have them push like they're walking down a grocery aisle, maybe even put I have a projector that I set up, and I will put a grocery aisle on the projector, like someone's walking up and down there. You can find videos everywhere. People, use GoPros in the weirdest places. You have them, look side to side, fake grab something. How am I feeling? How am I feeling? Make it specific for that person, because not only A, will they get better, but B, they will have more buy-in because you're saying, oh, this is for me. And they'll do their exercises and then it's more buy-in, and it's a positive cycle in that. So make it fun, make it interesting, make it specific. If you find you're doing the same thing with every concussion patient, you're probably not doing them the proper service.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. It's key. So tell me a little bit about what you are learning these days, and what's your new and exciting learning.
So right now, obviously I know there's a lot of free time on my hands. So besides helping to actually take care of my, condo with my wife better, and actually, help clean and all that fun stuff, I'm trying to really increase what I can do for the athletic population, because that's ultimately something that's my passion. That's where this all started. And so I'm looking to get my CSCS. Most PTs, we have the basics that you can do 70% of that CSCS, but then there's all these crazy stuff like we get nutrition, but we don't get you have a 250-pound linebacker who's training this many weeks, how many carbs do they need? I don't know. So that's what, gym layout, things like that you don't get necessarily in PT school. I'm really working on to get that, which ultimately hopefully leads to me getting my SCS down the road. That's a whole other thing. That's like a 10-year goal. And then really trying to help other people out by increasing what I'm doing on social media, just trying to throw exercises out there. Because unfortunately, we are in a time period where we're limited in what we can do. So how can we grow our workout regimens? And then not just that, but also same thing with what we talked about, like concussion, do it correctly, right? I mean, there's people who are trying to crank out push-ups all day, but they're a terrible scapular position. So let's try to give some education as to how to do that properly, so that when you finally leave shelter, we can go back to normal, whatever that normal might be once we're all done with this, right. That in a stable position. And then especially for some of those athletes and things, what if you're a senior spring lacrosse player and you're supposed to, in theory, next year go to school and partake in lacrosse? You don't want to be in a position where all of a sudden you weren't doing all this exercise you were used to doing. That's what happened to me when I tore my ACL. I ended up, because I didn't wrestle leading up to that lacrosse season, all of a sudden it was like, okay, my knee wasn't ready for this, and it tore. So let's try to bridge that gap the best we can, so that when we again emerge from this, you're not just noodle out there and lose everything you built up all those years.
Yeah, that's some awesome stuff. I think I've been watching you, I know, on Instagram, Instagram TV, I think it's called, and I haven't quite explored that myself yet. But I think the content that you're putting out is amazing, and like you give just the right instruction and breaking it down, and the key takeaway from learning that, like why you're doing that, like so many kids right now are going to go back, like whether you're a freshman senior in high school going to be a freshman player or anywhere along that realm, I think your pre-training season is going to not be, it's going to be different. You know, I mean, preseason usually starts in August for football, but like you're training before that. And so like, what can you do at home with whatever you have? And I think the content that you've been doing has been really super important for that. And I think I think you're doing I think it's awesome. Like, and so I will say, why don't you tell us the best place to find you on social media, I guess is that question.
Yeah, I with all my content. The reason I can speak to those kinds of things is because in high school and college, I did everything wrong. I did any mistake that I talk about in those videos, I did before. So it's not me coming off a high horse. It's like, well, this is why I didn't end up being able to wrestle my senior year, because I didn't do these things, and it ruined me in this way. So it all comes from bad knowledge I used to have. But you can find, usually on Instagram, it's just dr.masonwest_sport PT. And then from there, you can get to the Twitter handle. It's, you know, I don't do as much on Twitter just because there's just such a big volume there. I do more on Instagram because it's also a more fun platform, I feel like, to get through. Yeah, you can find me there.
Yeah, cool. And I will post that link down below once I can get there and do that too. So, Mason, it was awesome to talk with you here, and I love everything that you've been doing, and you mentioned something about like real functional training and things that are important to the patient, and I think that's I try to do that, but I know that because I'm kind of old school, haven't always done that, and but I really believe in that, and I think that's super important. I love that you're incorporating that and doing everything that you're doing. I think it's really cool stuff, and I keep up.
I appreciate it.
And you and I might get on and talk more strength training, hopefully in the future. So, because for me, it's awesome. So, we're gonna sign off now. But Mason, hang on, and we'll say goodbye separate. Great. Have a great day, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow. Take care.